Chapter 1. The Meeting. The first thing you need to understand is this. I built that project from nothing. Not from a template. Not from a half-baked outline someone left behind. From nothing. It started as a problem everyone else kept stepping around. Declining client retention in our mid-tier accounts. Quietly bleeding revenue. Quietly costing bonuses. Quietly threatening reputations. Including mine. I'm Maya Thompson, 34. Senior Strategy Analyst at Whitmore & Cole Consulting in downtown Chicago. Dark hair I usually wear straight, brown skin my grandmother calls coffee with cream, and a reputation for being intense, which, in corporate language, means I don't giggle when men interrupt me. The Monday of the meeting started like every high-stakes Monday does, with silence, the kind of silence that lives in your stomach. I woke up at 5:12 a.m., before my alarm, my brain already running slides, projections, contingency responses. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the dashboard I had rebuilt 3 times the night before. Because this presentation wasn't just another quarterly review. This was visibility. And visibility, in our firm, was oxygen. I got to the office at 7:03 a.m. The glass building reflected the pale sunrise like a promise, or a warning. The conference room, Grant Hall, was already booked. I had reserved it myself 2 weeks prior when I submitted my proposal for the Client Recovery Initiative. I had done everything by the book. Everything. Except account for Daniel Reed, my coworker. Same level, same title, different brand of confidence, the kind that fills a room before substance ever arrives. He was already inside when I walked in, sitting at the head of the long walnut table. My laptop cables were unplugged and set to the side. My screen was dark. His laptop was connected to the projector. For a second, I genuinely thought I had walked into the wrong room. "Morning," he said, flashing that easy smile. "Figured I'd help set up." Help. I looked at the screen behind him. Slide 1, my title, not even reworded. Mid-tier client retention, a recovery blueprint. My subtitle, my language, my structure. But his name was under it. Daniel Reed, strategy lead. The air left my lungs so slowly I almost didn't feel it. I set my bag down carefully. "You're presenting?" I asked. My voice was steady, even. He shrugged. "Yeah. I polished it up this weekend. Thought I'd take point. You had a lot going on." Polished it up. I stared at him. The hours in my apartment, the spreadsheets, the predictive model I coded myself because our analytics team said they were over capacity, the interviews I conducted with 10 frustrated clients, the retention psychology framework I built from scratch. Polished. Before I could respond, the door opened, and in walked the CEO, Margaret Whitmore herself. She rarely attended strategy reviews unless something was bleeding, which meant this mattered. Behind her, 2 board members, our division VP, and 3 senior partners. The room shifted. Energy snapped tight. Daniel stood immediately, confident, relaxed, like he'd rehearsed this moment. I realized something then. He had. He stepped forward. "Good morning, everyone. I'll be walking you through our new retention strategy." Hour. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. There are moments in your career when you understand, with terrifying clarity, that speaking too soon will make you look emotional, and staying silent might make you invisible. I chose silence. For now. I sat down. Margaret nodded toward Daniel. "Let's see what you've got." And just like that, he began presenting my work, my client data, My projections. My projected 18% recovery in 12 months. He delivered it smoothly. Too smoothly. Like he'd practiced my sentences in a mirror. I watched the faces around the table. Interest. Curiosity. Approval. When he reached the slide about the predictive churn model, he hesitated. Just slightly. A microsecond glitch. Because he didn't build that part. I did. But he kept going. Confident voice. Clean transitions. Strategic pauses. And I understood something that made my stomach turn cold. He wasn't improvising. He had studied it. He had taken my deck. And memorized it. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Margaret leaned back in her chair. "That's impressive," she said slowly. "Very impressive." Daniel smiled. "Thank you." She steepled her fingers, looked at the projections again. Then she asked the question. "How did you calculate the behavioral retention multiplier in Q3? The room shifted. Daniel blinked. Just once. "That's based on projected engagement variance." Margaret didn't nod. She waited. Silence is a weapon in executive rooms. He continued. "We layered historical churn against client touchpoint data." She tilted her head. "We?" He hesitated. I watched it happen in real time. The tiny fracture. He had memorized the words, but he didn't understand the architecture. Margaret's eyes moved. From him to me. For the first time that morning, she looked directly at me. "And Maya," she said calmly, "what would you add?" There it was. The opening. Daniel glanced at me quickly. A warning flicker. I could expose him. Right now. I could say, "Actually, I built that model." I could reclaim it publicly. But something stopped me. Not fear. Strategy. Instead, I smiled slightly and said, "I'd let Daniel answer." The room went still. Daniel's jaw tightened. Margaret leaned back again. "Go ahead," she said. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "The multiplier accounts for engagement elasticity." Margaret didn't blink. "How?" Silence. A longer one. His fingers tightened on the clicker. "The formula integrates sentiment analysis." I watched the board members exchange a glance. Because there was no sentiment analysis in that model. There was a logistic regression tied to usage frequency clusters. And only 2 people in that room knew it. Me. And whoever had actually built it. Margaret's voice stayed even. "Can you walk us through the equation?" Daniel swallowed. And that's when I knew. He hadn't expected her to attend. He had expected mid-level approval. Applause. A quick win. He hadn't prepared for depth. And I hadn't prepared to be erased. But here we were. The room felt warmer now. Tighter. Margaret looked between us. Then she said something I will never forget. "Maya, why don't you come up here?" Not a question, an invitation, or a test. I stood, walked to the front, felt every eye on me. I plugged my laptop back in. My file name was still in the system cache. Last modified by Maya Thompson. Date stamp, 2:14 a.m., Sunday. I didn't point it out. I didn't need to. I turned to the screen and said, calmly, "The multiplier is based on a weighted logistic regression tied to quarterly usage volatility. The formula adjusts for client maturity stage, which is why Q3 spikes, not because of engagement elasticity, but because onboarding cycles reset." Silence. Then Margaret smiled. Small, sharp. "Thank you," she said. And then she turned to Daniel. "You said it was your idea." His face flushed. The room felt different now. Not hostile, clarified. And I realized something powerful. I hadn't needed to accuse him. I just needed the right question asked. And that's the thing about theft in corporate America. It survives in rooms where no one looks closely, but it collapses under precision. Margaret closed her notebook. "We'll continue this discussion after lunch," she said. "Maya, Daniel, stay." The board filed out slowly. Daniel avoided my eyes. The door shut, and for the first time that morning, the silence felt like it belonged to me. This wasn't over, not even close, but the balance had shifted, and Daniel knew it. So did I. Chapter 2. After the door closed. The door clicked shut with a softness that didn't match the weight in the room. Margaret remained seated at the head of the table. Daniel stood near the screen, still holding the clicker like it might save him. I stayed by the projector, my laptop open, the regression model frozen on the slide. No one spoke for a full 5 seconds. In corporate time, that's an eternity. Margaret removed her glasses slowly. Not angry, not loud, just precise. "Daniel," she said evenly, "walk me through your contribution to this project." He cleared his throat. I refined the strategic positioning, framed the implementation phases, tightened the executive summary. None of that was entirely false. He had sent one late-night Slack message suggesting we simplify the language for the C-suite. That was it. Margaret nodded slightly, then turned to me. "Maya?" There it was again. The opening. I could destroy him right here, but destruction is messy. And I had learned early in my career that when a woman raises her voice in a boardroom, she's labeled emotional. When a man lies in one, he's labeled ambitious. So I chose something else. Clarity. "I designed the retention model," I said calmly. "Conducted the client interviews, built the financial projections. Daniel reviewed a draft last Thursday." Silence. Daniel's jaw flexed. Margaret didn't look surprised. That unsettled me more than if she had. She folded her hands. "Daniel," she said quietly, "why did you say it was your idea?" He hesitated. And for the first time since I'd met him, his confidence thinned. "I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly. "It's a team environment. I assumed we were aligned." Aligned, that word. So slippery, so convenient. Margaret's gaze sharpened. "Aligned does not mean interchangeable." The air shifted again. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. His shoulders lowered a fraction. Margaret stood. "I don't tolerate intellectual misrepresentation," she said. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Then she looked at me. "Maya, I want you to present this again tomorrow. Full board, 30 minutes, no interruptions." My heartbeat stumbled. Full board meant 12 executives. Full board meant budget authority. Full board meant visibility that could change a career. "Yes," I said. Daniel's head turned toward me sharply. Margaret continued. "Daniel, you'll attend. You won't present." A flush climbed up his neck, and in that small, almost invisible moment, I understood something important. Public correction is more devastating than public praise is empowering. She gathered her folder. "One more thing," she added without looking at him. "Integrity compounds, so does the lack of it." Then she walked out. The door closed again, this time louder. Daniel and I stood there alone. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then he exhaled hard. "You didn't have to do that," he muttered. I turned slowly. "Do what?" "Make me look stupid." I almost laughed. Instead, I stepped closer. "I didn't ask the question," I said quietly. "You answered it." His eyes flashed. You think this makes you the hero? He snapped. You embarrassed me. Embarrassed. That word hung between us. You presented my work, I replied evenly. What did you expect? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. I was trying to elevate it, he said. You're good, Maya, but you're not visible. I was helping. Helping. The audacity of it almost impressed me. I don't need you to make me visible, I said softly. I need you not to erase me. That landed. He stopped pacing. For the first time, he actually looked uncertain. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I closed my laptop slowly. No, I replied. I'm correcting it. And I walked out. That afternoon, the office felt different. News travels fast in firms like ours, not through official memos, through glances, through Slack pauses, through the way people suddenly choose their seats at lunch. By 2 p.m., 3 different colleagues had stopped by my desk with vague compliments. Strong save in there. Nice technical clarity. Didn't know you built predictive models. Didn't know. That part stayed with me. Because I had built them before, but no one had asked. Visibility isn't just about speaking. It's about being seen when you do. Around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stepped into a quiet hallway and answered. Maya Thompson. It's Margaret. My spine straightened automatically. Yes. I reviewed the back-end files, she said. The timestamps are clear. A pause. You handled that well. Not effusive, not warm, but meaningful. Thank you. Another pause. You should know something, she added. Daniel has a pattern of attaching himself to high-performing initiatives. That didn't surprise me. But this time, she continued, he chose the wrong project. A small exhale escaped me before I could stop it. Tomorrow isn't just about the model, she said. It's about ownership. Be prepared to defend implementation. I will. I know. And then she hung up. I stood there staring at the blank screen. Ownership. Defense. This wasn't just a presentation anymore. It was a positioning moment. And in corporate America, positioning is survival. That night, I didn't go home at 6 or 7 or 8. I stayed. Rebuilding the deck, not because it wasn't strong, but because tomorrow required dominance, not competence. There's a difference. Competence answers questions. Dominance anticipates them. By 9:30 p.m., the office was mostly empty. The city lights outside the glass walls shimmered like scattered data points. I stood at the whiteboard alone, mapping out potential objections. What about scalability? What if projections are inflated? Why hasn't this been attempted before? I answered each one aloud. Practiced tone, controlled breathing. There's something people don't tell you about being a woman in high-stakes rooms. You don't just prepare your content, you prepare your composure. At 10:47 p.m., I finally shut my laptop. As I waited for the elevator, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not anger, not vindication, clarity. Daniel hadn't just tried to take credit. He had assumed he could, assumed I wouldn't push back, assumed the room wouldn't look closely, and maybe, in another version of this story, he would have been right if Margaret hadn't attended, if she hadn't asked that one question, if I had reacted emotionally instead of strategically. One question. That's all it took. The next morning, I wore navy. Sharp lines, structured blazer, minimal jewelry, armor disguised as professionalism. When I walked into the boardroom at 8:55 a.m., Daniel was already there. But he wasn't at the head of the table. He was seated along the side, legal pad open, pen still. He didn't look at me. Margaret entered at exactly 9:00. 12 executives followed. The room filled with quiet authority. Margaret nodded toward the screen. "Maya," she said simply. And this time, when I walked to the front, no one questioned why. I connected my laptop, took a breath, looked at the room, and began. 3 months ago, we identified a silent revenue leak in our mid-tier portfolio. My voice was steady, controlled, but underneath it ran something stronger. Not revenge, not even validation. Ownership. Because this wasn't just about a stolen idea anymore. It was about a pattern being interrupted. And I intended to make sure it stayed that way. Chapter 3. The question behind the question. By the time I reached slide 12, I could feel the shift. Not polite interest. Engagement. Board members weren't checking their phones. No one was whispering. Even the CFO, notorious for interrupting mid-sentence, was taking notes. I clicked to the financial forecast. This model projects an 18% recovery in at-risk accounts within 12 months, I said. Conservatively adjusted to 14% under stress conditions. The CFO leaned forward. Define stress conditions. There it was, not an attack, a test. Reduced onboarding velocity and delayed renewal cycles, I replied immediately. We built elasticity into the model by lowering engagement frequency thresholds by 7%. He nodded slowly, not convinced, but listening. From the corner of my eye, I could see Daniel. Still, quiet, watching. Margaret hadn't looked at him once. I moved into implementation strategy. Phase 1, client segmentation reset. Phase 2, behavioral flag integration. Phase 3, executive intervention. Pipeline. Clear, layered, defensible. When I finished, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it breathe. Margaret steepled her fingers again. "You're asking for a budget reallocation of $2.3 million, she said calmly. "Convince us." The room stilled. This was the real presentation. Not the model. Not the math. Power. I stepped away from the podium. Sometimes distance changes perception. "We're already losing $4.8 million annually in preventable churn," I said. "We can either keep paying for silence or invest in correction." A slight murmur. I continued. "This isn't experimental. It's corrective. The data already exists. We just haven't been looking at it properly." The COO spoke up. "And if it fails?" I met his gaze. "Then it fails transparently," I said. "With measurable checkpoints every quarter, but doing nothing is a guaranteed loss." Another silence. Different now. Heavier. Margaret glanced down at her notes, then back at me. "Who else worked on this?" The question was surgical. I didn't hesitate. "I consulted analytics for data polls. I conducted client interviews personally. Daniel reviewed a draft." There it was. No accusation. No edge. Just fact. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat. Margaret's gaze flicked toward him. Just briefly. Then back to me. "And you built the predictive engine yourself?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because no one else volunteered. Because I was tired of waiting. Because I've learned that if you want ownership, you take it." But I didn't say that. "I didn't want dependency to delay execution," I replied. A board member near the end of the table, a woman in her late 50s I'd only spoken to once, leaned forward. "What's your long-term objective here, Maya?" That question hit differently. Not about the project, about me. I felt the room tilt. This was no longer a technical evaluation. It was a leadership evaluation. My objective, I said carefully, is to build a system that doesn't rely on individual heroics. A subtle glance around the table. Retention shouldn't depend on who shouts loudest in meetings. It should be embedded into how we operate. The words hung there. Retention shouldn't depend on who shouts loudest. No one missed the subtext. Margaret's lips curved, almost imperceptibly. The CFO cleared his throat. What timeline to pilot? 60 days, I answered. 3 test markets. And you'll lead it? Yes. That was the moment. Not when they nodded, not when they scribbled notes, but when Daniel looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something unfamiliar in his expression. Not anger, not arrogance, uncertainty. He was realizing this wasn't about catching him in a lie anymore. This was about replacing him in the narrative. Margaret finally closed her notebook. Step outside for 5 minutes, she said. Just like that. Decision time. I gathered my laptop calmly and walked out. Daniel followed. The door closed behind us. The hallway felt colder than I remembered. We stood side by side, not looking at each other. After a long moment, he spoke. You're really going for it. I turned slowly. For what? Visibility. The word again. He almost sounded bitter. I've always gone for it, I said quietly. You just didn't notice. He let out a short breath. You think this makes you untouchable? Untouchable. Interesting choice. No, I replied. It makes me accountable. He studied me then, like he was recalculating something. You could have buried me yesterday, he said. Yes. But you didn't. No. Why? Because humiliation isn't leadership. Because I don't want your downfall. I want my rise. Because if I destroy you, they'll wonder if I'm difficult. But if I outperform you, they'll wonder why they ever overlooked me. I met his eyes. Because I don't need to. That landed, harder than if I'd yelled. The door opened. Margaret stepped out. The board has approved the pilot, she said. The air left my lungs. Funding reallocated immediately. Implementation begins Monday. A beat. Maya, you'll report directly to me for the next quarter. There it was. Visibility. Not borrowed. Earned. Daniel stiffened beside me. Margaret turned to him. You'll transition your current accounts to James in operations. A demotion without the word. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Understood. She looked at both of us for a long moment, then said something that would echo in my head for weeks. Credit follows clarity. Remember that. And she walked away. That afternoon, the office buzzed. Not loudly, but differently. People stopped by my desk with more than polite curiosity now. They wanted in. How can I support the pilot? Need help with rollout? I've got a contact in Dallas who'd be perfect for Test Market 3. Suddenly, collaboration felt real, not performative. Daniel stayed in his office most of the day. Door half closed. Around 5:30 p.m., I saw him walking toward the elevators carrying a cardboard file box. Not fired, not publicly reprimanded, but repositioned. Corporate consequences are rarely dramatic. They're structural, and structure determines trajectory. That night, I stood in my apartment kitchen staring at the Chicago skyline through my window. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt aware that this was just the beginning. Because success doesn't silence resistance, it attracts it. And Daniel wasn't the only person in that building who had underestimated me. He was just the first one forced to confront it. I poured myself a glass of wine and replayed the moment in the first meeting. How did you calculate the behavioral retention multiplier in Q3? One question. It didn't just expose him, it revealed me. And sometimes that's the real turning point. Not when someone falls, but when you step forward. The next Monday, I walked into the new project war room Margaret had assigned us. Glass walls, dedicated analytics support, budget line approved. My name on the internal memo. Pilot lead, Maya Thompson. I ran my fingers lightly over the printed document. Ownership. Clear. Public. Structural. As the team began to gather, I caught my reflection in the glass. Dark hair pulled back. Focused eyes. Steady posture. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was trying to prove I belonged in that room. I knew I did. And somewhere across the office, Daniel knew it too. Chapter 4. The Cost of Visibility. Success is loud in meetings, but it's quiet in hallways. 3 weeks into the pilot, the numbers were tracking ahead of projection. Dallas outperformed expectations. Phoenix stabilized early. Atlanta, our riskiest market, showed the first signs of churn reversal by week 2. Objectively, it was working. Politically, it was shifting gravity, and gravity makes people nervous. The first sign came in the form of a calendar invite. Subject line, alignment discussion. Organizer, Victor Lang, Division VP. Victor didn't attend the original presentation. Victor didn't congratulate me after board approval. Victor didn't respond to my implementation memo. But now, suddenly, he wanted alignment. I walked into his office at 3 p.m. sharp. Corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of space that whispers authority instead of announcing it. He didn't look up immediately when I entered. "Have a seat, Maya." Measured tone, polite, strategic. I sat. He closed a folder slowly. "I've been reviewing the retention pilot." "That's great," I replied evenly. A pause. "You moved quickly?" "Yes. The board requested a 60-day rollout." He nodded once. "Ambitious. Not praise. Assessment." I held his gaze. "We're ahead of benchmarks." "I've seen that." Another pause. Then he leaned back. "You bypassed standard departmental review." There it was. The real topic. "I reported directly to Margaret as instructed," I said calmly. His lips pressed thin for half a second. "Yes, you did." Silence stretched between us. This wasn't about process. It was about control. "You're creating a new operational channel," he continued. "That affects internal hierarchy." Hierarchy. That word again. Daniel had tried to step over me. Now someone above him felt something shifting. "I'm implementing a board-approved initiative," I said carefully. "Not restructuring leadership." Victor studied me for a long moment. "You're young," he said finally. I didn't blink. "I'm 34. A faint smile. Not warm. "You're early in your executive exposure." Exposure, as if visibility were a disease. "I understand the ecosystem here," he continued. "Momentum can create friction." Translation: slow down. Translation: know your place. Translation: don't get too visible too fast. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them steady. "Is there a specific concern about performance metrics?" I asked. He exhaled softly. "No, the numbers are strong." Of course they were. "Then I'm open to feedback on integration," I added. I wasn't backing down, but I wasn't escalating either. This was chess. He leaned forward now. "Perception matters, Maya." "Yes, it does." And right now, the perception is that you've stepped around your chain of command. There it was, the accusation without the word. I followed the CEO's directive, I replied. And in doing so, he said quietly, you've made certain senior leaders look peripheral. Peripheral. I understood then. This wasn't about Daniel anymore. This was about threat. Visibility rearranges rooms, and some people resent being rearranged. I met his gaze steadily. That wasn't my intention. Intent is safe language. Impact is more dangerous. He nodded slowly. I'm sure. Silence. Then he stood, signaling the meeting's end. Just be careful, he said. Rapid ascension invites scrutiny. I rose as well. I welcome scrutiny, I said softly. Our eyes locked for a brief second. Then I walked out. By the fourth week, resistance became subtler. Emails questioning minor budget reallocations, requests for additional reporting layers, calendar conflicts that delayed approvals. Nothing dramatic, just friction. And friction, if consistent, slows progress. One afternoon, as I was reviewing Atlanta's engagement metrics, a message popped up from Daniel. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long moment, then replied. Come by at 4. He arrived exactly at 4:02. No swagger this time. No performance confidence. Just quiet calculation. He closed the glass door behind him. I owe you an apology, he said. Direct. Unexpected. I waited. I shouldn't have presented your work. No defensiveness. No justification. Just fact. I studied him carefully. What changed? I asked. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Perspective. He gestured vaguely toward the office floor. I thought I was playing the game, but I misread the board. A pause. And I misread you. I leaned back in my chair. In what way? I thought you'd stay technical, he admitted. Behind the scenes. Honest. Brutally so. And now? I asked. He met my eyes. Now I realize you're strategic. That word landed differently than visibility ever had. Strategic meant intentional, deliberate, dangerous, if you were competition. I'm not your enemy, Daniel, I said quietly. He nodded. I know. Another pause. Victor met with you, didn't he? That caught my attention. Yes, he exhaled. He's feeling exposed. Why? Because Margaret didn't loop him in before approving your direct reporting line. Ah, so that was the real fracture. This wasn't about me stepping over hierarchy. It was about hierarchy being stepped over without warning. And where do you stand? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Honestly, I'm trying to decide. Fair. Corporate loyalty is rarely moral. It's positional. You don't have to choose sides, I said. A small smile flickered across his face. In this building, everyone chooses sides. He wasn't wrong. By week 6, the numbers were undeniable. Dallas showed a 9% retention rebound. Phoenix closed 2 renewal contracts previously marked at risk. Atlanta stabilized entirely. The board requested a mid-pilot review. Margaret scheduled it for Friday. Victor was copied. So was the entire executive team. This wasn't just progress anymore. It was proof. The night before the review, I stayed late again. Not because I doubted the data, but because I understood the stakes. If this scaled company-wide, it would reshape operational authority. And reshaping authority always triggers defense mechanisms. At 9:15 p.m., as I packed my laptop, I noticed Victor's office light still on. I paused, considered, then walked toward it. He looked up as I knocked lightly. Yes? I wanted to give you tomorrow's summary deck in advance, I said, holding out a printed copy. A gesture. Strategic. He took it, browsed the first few slides. His expression didn't change. Confident? He asked. Yes. He held my gaze a second longer than comfortable. You're aware that expansion will require structural adjustments. I am. And those adjustments may not favor everyone. I didn't respond immediately. Then, calmly, progress rarely does. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't argue. I left his office with a strange sense of equilibrium. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was negotiation, and I was no longer the least powerful person in the room. Friday morning arrived sharp and clear. The boardroom filled again. Familiar faces, new tension. Margaret nodded toward me. Let's review. I walked to the front. No shaking hands this time, no tight chest, just focus. I presented the numbers, the client testimonials, the measurable churn decline. When I finished, silence settled. Margaret looked toward Victor. Your thoughts? The room stilled. Victor adjusted his glasses slowly. The data is compelling, he said. A small shift in the room. He continued. Scaling will require integration under my division. There it was. Claiming territory. I remained still. Margaret's gaze flicked toward me, then back to him. And who do you propose leads the expansion? She asked. The question hovered. Victor hesitated. Only for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. He was calculating. Power. Optics. Outcome. Finally, he said, Maya. A quiet ripple passed through the room. Not applause. Recognition. Margaret nodded once. Agreed. And just like that, the battlefield shifted again. Not through confrontation, not through humiliation, through inevitability. Victor hadn't surrendered. He'd adapted, because fighting proven success would have cost him more than supporting it. The meeting adjourned. Executives filtered out. Daniel passed me on his way to the door. Congratulations, he said quietly. I studied his face. No resentment, just awareness. Thank you. When the room emptied, Margaret approached. You handled resistance well, she said. I expected it. She smiled faintly. Most people don't. A pause. You understand something critical, Maya. What's that? That power isn't taken in one dramatic moment. She gathered her folder. It's accumulated. And then she left. I stood alone in the room for a moment, looking at the empty chairs, the long walnut table, the same space where my work had once been spoken in someone else's voice. Now it carried mine. Not louder, not sharper, just clearer. And clarity, I was learning, is the most dangerous thing you can bring into a room that prefers shadows. Chapter 5. Credit follows clarity. 3 months later, the retention model wasn't a pilot anymore. It was policy. What started as a 60-day experiment became a company-wide framework adopted across every division. The predictive engine I built was now integrated into our internal dashboard architecture. Account managers referenced its flags in weekly briefings. Regional directors quoted its projections in revenue calls. My name wasn't on every slide, but it didn't need to be. Because everyone knew. That's the thing about real ownership. Eventually, it stops requiring introduction. The official announcement came on a Tuesday morning. Company-wide town hall. Margaret stood on stage in the auditorium, lights low, the firm's logo glowing behind her. Over the last quarter, she began, we reversed a critical revenue vulnerability. Slides flashed behind her. retention curves rising steadily upward. Our mid-tier churn rate has decreased by 11.4%. A ripple of impressed murmurs filled the room. She let the number sit there. Then she said it. This initiative was designed and led by Maya Thompson. The spotlight found me before I had time to brace for it. Applause followed, not polite, real, sustained. I stood slowly, smiled, nodded, but inside something much quieter was happening. Relief, not because I needed validation, but because the narrative was no longer negotiable. After the town hall, people lined up to shake my hand. Some genuine, some strategic. Victor approached near the end. He extended his hand. "Well executed," he said. His tone carried no resentment now, only recalibration. "Thank you," I replied. He studied me for a moment. "You've changed the trajectory of this division." It wasn't flattery. It was assessment. "I improved a process," I said evenly. A faint smile touched his mouth. "And in doing so," he replied, "you improved your position." We held each other's gaze. Not adversaries, not allies. Professionals acknowledging reality. Daniel came last. He didn't offer his hand. He offered something else. "I accepted a transfer," he said quietly. I blinked. "Where?" "San Francisco office. Different vertical." A reset. Not exile, but distance. "I needed to start somewhere I'm not already defined," he added. That surprised me. Defined. By a mistake. By a moment. "Are you okay with that?" I asked. He gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Yeah, I think I confused speed with strategy." A pause. "You didn't." We stood there in a strange kind of understanding. "I learned something," he said. "What?" "That the room always knows who built it." I smiled faintly. "Eventually." He exhaled softly. "Good luck, Maya." "You too." And just like that, the tension that once defined our dynamic dissolved into something more neutral. Not friendship, not rivalry. Lesson. 6 months after the original meeting, Margaret called me into her office again. Not for alignment, not for review, for promotion. Director of Strategic Growth. New title. Expanded authority. Direct reporting line to the executive team. "You earned this," she said simply. I thought back to that first Monday morning, walking into Grant Hall, seeing my title slide under someone else's name, the rush of heat, the decision not to explode, the choice to wait for the right question. "Thank you," I said. She leaned back slightly. "Do you know why I asked that multiplier question?" I held her gaze. "You suspected." She nodded once. "But suspicion isn't enough. Precision reveals character." A pause. "You didn't just defend your work. You demonstrated leadership." I felt the weight of that settle over me. Leadership. Not technical skill. Not resilience. Leadership. "Keep asking the right questions," she added. Then she smiled, warmer this time, "and keep answering them." That night, I stood again in my apartment kitchen. Same skyline, different vantage point. The city lights didn't look like scattered data points anymore. They looked like windows, rooms, spaces where decisions were made. And I realized something fundamental. The meeting where Daniel said it was his idea wasn't the turning point because he lied. It was the turning point because I didn't panic, because I didn't rush to defend myself with emotion, because I trusted that clarity would outlast performance. In corporate America, theft often hides behind confidence, but confidence without comprehension collapses under scrutiny. All it takes is one precise question. How did you calculate the behavioral retention multiplier in Q3? a simple sentence. But beneath it lived something larger: accountability. The truth is, I didn't win because he failed. I won because I understood the architecture of the model, of the room, of power itself. Power isn't volume. It isn't posturing. It isn't grabbing credit before someone else can. Power is preparation meeting visibility, and visibility, when earned, is impossible to steal. A week after my promotion was announced, I walked past Grant Hall again. The same long walnut table, the same projector, different energy. A junior analyst stood at the front, clearly nervous, explaining a new analytics dashboard. Halfway through, someone interrupted her, a dismissive tone, a subtle challenge. I watched her shoulders tense. I saw it. That familiar crossroad. Speak too sharply and risk being labeled difficult. Stay quiet and risk disappearing. Before she could choose, I spoke. "Let her finish," I said calmly. The room quieted. She glanced at me, surprised, grateful. Then she continued, clearer this time. When the meeting ended, she approached me hesitantly. "Thank you," she said. I smiled. "Know your numbers," I told her softly, "and don't let anyone speak them for you." She nodded, determination replacing nerves. And in that moment, I understood something even deeper than promotion. Influence multiplies. The model I built saved revenue, but the example I set reshaped expectation. No one tried to present my work as their own again, not because they feared humiliation, but because the culture had shifted. Margaret had been right. Credit follows clarity, and clarity, once introduced into a system, is hard to remove. Sometimes people ask me what that moment felt like. When the CEO asked the question that exposed everything. They expect drama, shock, triumph. But the truth is quieter. It felt like stillness, like the second before a door opens, like standing in a room where the lights are about to turn on. Daniel said, "It was his idea," but he couldn't answer how it worked. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Because ideas aren't just slides, they're architecture, and the person who builds the foundation will always know where the beams connect. So if there's one thing I carry forward from that meeting, it's this: don't fight for noise, fight for depth. Don't chase visibility, earn it. And when someone tries to take what you built, let the right question do the work.